Hello and welcome to another episode of the Measurement Lab. I'm your host, Elijah Carey, and today I have a very special guest. I have Anand Jain, a longtime NI engineer and member of R&D team who has spent most of his career working on TestStand. And Anand, if you could just introduce yourself, how long have you been at NI, and when did you start working with TestStand? Perhaps what version was your first version of TestStand?
Hey, thank you, Eli, for hosting me. This is a pleasure. So I've been at NI 25 years and a few months, and I've been working on TestStand for about, I'd like to say 23 and a half years. And that's when I first started working. I initially added features to TestStand 2.0, so and started adding major components to TestStand 3.0. So I've been with the product for some time now.
Okay, so you weren't with the very first version. If I remember correctly, it actually had a different name when it first came out. It was Test Executive or something, or the Test Executive Toolkit. Is that right?
So the Test Executive Toolkit is like the precursor to TestStand. So we did start out by releasing what we call Test Executive Toolkit to allow you to try to achieve workflows similar to a test executive. So some way to manage your test systems, your test software, as well as execute them, get reports. So we wrote one in LabVIEW and CVI. And then based on the feedback we received, we realized that really having a more standard product that can work across languages, work across product types was important, right?
And that's actually a point I want to come back to, because I think it's pretty special how TestStand enables support for so many different languages. But before we get into that, I mean, it sounds like there was a pretty big change between what was the original Test Executive Toolkit and what we now know as TestStand. Can you speak to some of the reasoning that went into what sounds like a pretty big change in the nature of the software between the first version and what is today TestStand? Were there lessons that were specifically incorporated, or just design philosophies that resulted in what is a fundamentally different tool?
So Test Executive Toolkit, I'd like to say, was almost like a monolith architecture. It had a lot of code. It did a lot of similar functionality, but customization was hard, and customers were starting to ask for customization of what they're seeing and how they're interacting in the environment. And so we took a step back and said, okay, really, one of the big things we want to do is create something that's highly customizable with a plugin architecture so that customers can modify it. At the same time, we wanted to deliver performance, we wanted to deliver usability. So that's what went into the thought process of let's rebuild it. Plus, I think one of the big changes that happened in the industry is monolith architectures was frowned upon. And so it was a perfect time for us to revisit and say, okay, let's re-architect the products.
Okay, I'm curious. I know what, like when I would refer to something as a monolith in the world of software, it's like just one, atomic blob versus like broken up and componentized. In the context of this, the monolith architecture was like how is the new architecture not a monolith? Can you just elaborate on that particular
absolutely.
point?
So the old test executive toolkits were all like a single executable that could run a piece of test code, a test program set, or a sequence. And the new architecture it's actually built into a whole bunch of DLLs where each plugin module can be replaced independently of the larger system. It's got standard APIs to talk between each other, and that's how we built the architecture. So some of those things were made. The concept of a process model existed, but it wasn't customizable, and that's again, we looked at how do we customize, how do we make it accessible, how do we support our user workflows while still giving the functionality.
So I want to talk a little bit about the impetus that led to Test Executive and now TestStand, because I think NI, for the entirety of its existence, has really focused on serving markets that need a high degree of customization and flexibility. Right? All of our customers are doing very different things, hence the modular architecture, et cetera. But here we are presupposing that you could actually standardize a good chunk of it, that we could actually turn a big part of the software into a standard tool chain that could serve all these different markets. I mean, was it obvious to you at the outset, or the team, that there was a clear bounding line that this is something that we can make standard? And how do we manage that tension between the the desire to have a standard product, yet the fact that the market we serve by definition always needs a lot of customization and flexibility. And how is that requirement from the market perspective influenced how we've approached building this tool over the last 20 plus years?
Right. I mean, that's a good question, Eli. So, yes, our customers use TestStand in many different ways. And every feature that we incorporate, we always think about, okay, what is the customer trying to do compared to what can we provide out of the box? And then how do we make that delta easier for the customer to accomplish? And that's really where we spent a lot of time. And that's why we spent a lot of time adding new features, right? And so it is a challenging problem. So in a sense, as you make it more customizable, it gets more complex for the product to be used. And so it's a balancing act between trying to make it usable out of the box for people who don't want to customize it, while still providing the capability to accomplish that. And so a lot of thought went into the interfaces we provide, the data types we use, the APIs we provide for the users to interact with. What are the reusable components we provide for our customers to customize? All that influenced heavily on, getting the workflow working for our customers.
Well, and okay, so to go back to the comment you made earlier, I think one thing that is really special about TestStand is obviously, NI, we're the LabVIEW company, and so, but we made a very deliberate decision that this was not just going to be a tool for LabVIEW, that it would in fact support, and you can correct me here, I know it supports C, C++, Python. What other languages are first-class citizens?
So .NET, calling ActiveX components, DLLs, with regular DLLs that you get out of the box. In fact, some of the legacy languages like HT Basic, even Java, there's a way to call into Java. So that's
been a
been
unifier, right?
Yeah,
you can use
a unifier, right?
And so to go back to my question, I mean, was that a difficult decision? Was it obvious based on market requirements? Like, why go that route versus, doubling down on our LabVIEW brand and just making it a LabVIEW only product?
Right. Yeah. And some of the thought process that went into it is because customers were asking, right? Like, so if you take any large test system that is used in production, there's usually a variety of products, including NI and non-NI products. And every one of them provide different interfaces to get work done, right? And so we were looking at saying, how can we create a product that can enable end customer to unify their workflow, regardless of who provided the ecosystem, right? And so, yes, we did start out with CVI and LabVIEW, but then we very quickly incorporated, DLL adapter. We added ActiveX because TestStand's API is COM-based, so we added COM API, ability to call in COM APIs. At that time, IV COM was starting to become popular, so we wanted to provide a way to interact with IV COM drivers, and so we added COM drivers. HT Basic was popular with a subset of our customers, so we added a HT Basic adapter. So a lot of it is customer driven, but it also is in line with our thought process of making it open, flexible, customizable. And the bigger question that we want to address is how do we provide capability to unify your test system, right? Like, we didn't want to give a pinpoint solution. We wanted to give something that made you possible to get your workflow done.
Well, and just to pile onto that, I mean, we also, in our discussions with customers, quickly realized that building a test executive wasn't their core competency, right? They built, maybe writing their tests or certainly building their product was, but this became a sufficiently complicated, large piece of software. And why invest your own resources in that versus using a standard product where possible? But I mean, I don't mean to turn this into a sales pitch. I do, however, want to pivot to some of the technical details. I know you've worked on a lot of different aspects of TestStand. There's several aspects of it from a technology perspective I like to talk about and brag about, but I'd like to give you the option to do that. I mean, what are some of the specific, let's peel back the hood a little bit and talk about some of the underpinnings of what makes TestStand special. Do you have a particular technology or piece of the product that you worked on that you think is especially novel or interesting that you'd like to share?
So I'd like to call out two different capabilities. Like the process models was one that we put a lot of thought into. We wanted to be customizable, at the same time provide a lot of power out of the box and capabilities. And so the process models, the ability to run in parallel and batch and sequential, were critical to enable customers to start using TestStand for larger systems out of the box, right? And so process models was one of them. The other big innovation we did in the past was ability to encapsulate a lot of functionality into these controls that made it possible to write complex user interfaces without really understanding the nuts and bolts of all the APIs you're talking to and how do you get your test system to behave a given way. So, or display the information to user. So those two are, I think, pretty fundamental to making it usable, right? Like we take a very powerful engine that TestStand's engine is, but at the same time, you want it where customers can accomplish a lot of their workflows without having to learn everything. So these two pieces made it possible to bridge that gap. And they weren't there in the first versions of TestStand, right? So they were added over time based on feedback we received from customers. And, for the UI controls, for example, we went from something like 10,000 lines of code in C# to less than 1,000 lines that the user customizes, right? And that made a big difference. That made usability for a user.
What's the phrase? The best line of code is a line of code you delete. Right? Like, so it sounds like you actually decreased the C# code for the UI for the sake of user customization. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And we pulled a lot of it into standard components that made it possible to do, right? And the measure of lines of code was literally our big measure, right? We were like, okay, how do I minimize everything that the user has to do to get what to do? And that became a big mantra that we went after.
Slock. I haven't heard Slock as a metric in a few years. Source lines of code. No, that's great. So, yeah, just to double click on process models for a minute. I know when I first learned about TestStand, it was, well, obviously I write my sequence. Great that I can use any mix of languages, but then, like, I think I initially struggled with, why do I need different process models? Like, why isn't there just like run the test that I told you to run? Can you elaborate on like what drove the decision to have this specific aspect of the engine that is a process model, and why it's necessary to have that as kind of a separate component in the overall architecture?
Yeah. If you take any large test system, right, like one of the big aspects that you need to break down is what is the standard set of things I need to do because I'm part of a factory automation setup, or I need to handle my DUT and get it to a given state. How do I prompt my operator for information? At the same time, you also have parts of your test that are very specific to your DUT. Like you want to talk about, what am I testing in my DUT? What am I trying to validate? What am I trying to read to ensure it's done correctly? This breakdown is actually critical, right? Like ideally what you want is how you test your DUT should not matter in the larger workflow. Like whether I'm logging results to a database, whether I'm creating reports, whether I'm prompting the operator or using a scanning tool to get the serial number. These two are different aspects of your thing and actually are done by different people. So people who define the factory automation or how you want to run production runs are not the same people who go write your test sequence. And so those were some of the thought processes say, let's break it down and say, okay, what does a test engineer do for a given DUT? And what is parts of the framework that we want an architect group to provide? And those went into a lot of the discussions. The process models themselves provide multiple different functionality, right? Like we take parallel model, one of the power of parallel model is the ability to run test parallel DUTs, multiple DUTs in parallel, right? And so if you have like 196 up DUTs and you want to test them in parallel, TestStand has literally in a flip of a switch, you can suddenly run your test sequence with 196 parallel threads calling into your code, right? Now, your test code needs to be authored correctly to handle this workflow. But assuming you did that, the ability to turn on and turn off different DUTs, different sockets, depending on what you're trying to do, it's one of the big powers we provided, right? The ability to.
When was the parallel process model introduced? Because it kind of predates multi-core processors being all the rage, right?
Correct, yeah. So parallel process model, I think we introduced the first version in TestStand 2.0, and then we added to it in TestStand 3. Later, TestStand 2012, we went in and augmented it and modified it to improve performance. But very early on, we did parallel process model. Yes, multi-core was still not the rage. And also the other big thing was the parallel process model has now the capability to leverage all the cores that are there in a machine, right? And so it was it was really a powerful thing we did a long time back that now we get a lot of benefit from. So,
I'm laughing because I just remember building PCs. It was always about clocks, and then we kind of plateaued. And suddenly, it was all about multi-core. And I think
multiple.
just to get on my own personal soapbox for a second, I think it's interesting to consider that in the context of test, you have this unusually pronounced coupling to hardware and whatever unique data rates or acquisition rates or communication rates all these different devices in your system are capable of. And you never want to be at the mercy of limiting the performance of one as a result of the other. And so it's just, I think always to me highlights how uniquely valuable multi-threaded software is in the context of test and measurement. Because, if you're talking about pure application software, everything will run as fast as the computer it's being run on. Versus here, you have so much I/O, and how you interface with that is often a constraint that dictates architecture. So I think it's really worth highlighting that LabVIEW and testing and all our tools have really prioritized this because of the market requirements, even before the dawn of multi-core as the predominant way to increase performance. So,
and just to add one more
yep.
aspect to it, writing multi-core software is actually pretty complex, right? To get it
Yes.
right, to make sure it works correctly, and to get the performance you need, right? And so I think those are some of the big things that you get out of the box with our products, right? Like LabVIEW, you pull a while loop, you get suddenly two threads running. In TestStand, you literally hit a switch and now you're running that same sequence as two different threads, right? And so all this
Yep.
is possible because the power of the software, right? It makes it enable you to do a lot of complex things.
Yep. And I know personally, I'm sure you have too. But we've worked with a lot of customers where the ability to take a single tester and now you can connect it to multiple product line or manufacturing lines from multiple duds at the same time. I mean, that's real savings in terms of throughput and capital overhead. And in fact, on that note, I know a lot of the customers we work with, we can't always talk about their names, but if you have any favorites and you can anonymize them or public ones that maybe you've seen at NI Week that you were personally a part of, any you'd like to highlight out of the tens of thousands of people that are actively using TestStand every day that you think are especially exciting or novel?
Right. I'll go back to Multicore. So earlier this year, I worked with a large silicon manufacturer who basically was trying to run 196 sites up with test and LabVIEW, and they had hard requirements of 1 millisecond performance requirements for some of the tests. Okay, and so when they contacted NI, they were like, "Can we even do it?" And at the end, we got it to meet their numbers. They were running it for days. The requirements is this setup has to be running for months, and so they were very successful. And so that was one of the recent exciting things that we got working without frankly even modifying anything in the product. The product just worked, right? It was mostly getting the customer to do the right thing, modifying the way they wrote code, understanding what's happening. That's been
Awesome.
a really challenging, fun aspect of what we did recently, right? And 196 sites it's actually pretty massive. For them, they were like, wow, we actually did it. So
I love that.
that was really cool.
Hey, so, one shifting gears a little bit, I think one thing about TestStand that I think is unique or uniquely challenging is that it interfaces with such a wide mix of stakeholders in a typical test organization. Right? You've got the guy that writes the test, who may actually be different from the guy who architects the test system. Then you've got the person that runs the test, the person that consumes the data. And I mean, how have you balanced serving all of these different audiences with regards to the design of the tool, the experience of the software? I mean, maybe I missed somebody too, but just maybe if you could speak to the tension of those different stakeholders, how they interface with the tool, and how you as like an R&D architect have balanced those in our decision process for prioritization.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think the test engineer is front and center for TestStand, right? And we want to make sure that the test engineer can get their work done as fast as possible with least amount of effort and accomplish the workflow, right? And as we move away from the test engineer, then we start making compromises, right? In the sense we say, okay, if it impacts the test engineer's workflow, we are going to make it harder for the architect to do something. And further out, as we move out, we make it where they have to do more work to get the same task done, right? the data logging aspects, the ability to connect to backend systems, all that is a lot more simple because TestStand has got a very powerful API. It's got huge connectivity to the rest of the world. So the architect's life is a lot simpler to get that part of the workflow done and accomplish the work they need to do. But when we get down to what does the test engineer have to write compared to what an architect has to do, sometimes you make a balance between like, okay, if it makes life harder for a test engineer, we're going to make it harder for the architect because we feel those folks are more competent, they have more time to do some of the work. Whereas the test engineer's work is like, I need it done yesterday. So we want to make sure this.
Well, and I know you and I have been personally involved with many discussions where people want to talk to us about abstraction layers, right? And it's always rooted in how do I enable my test engineer to do their job as quickly as possible and kind of hide all the complexity. But then it's, you get into, well, what am I abstracting? What layer do I abstract? Do I abstract the measurement? Do I abstract the hardware? And so Anand, tell us the answer. Which one? Is it the hardware? Is it the measurement? Is it both? How do you do this?
It's all of the above.
All of it. Okay. No, but seriously, I mean, what type of guiding philosophies would you offer to, because this is a constant, yeah, go.
Yeah, this is a constant, I'd like to say this is a constant tension, right? And I'd like to basically take a step back and really talk about, what are we trying to abstract and why would we want to abstract something, right? And the idea is to get the test engineer to be as successful as possible, as fast as possible, right? And so, depending on what they're trying to do and what is their workflow, really the answer needs to be, help define what the abstraction layers you need to provide, right? Like you can take it all the way from like pre-canned step types. I know a big company out there who have all the test engineers do is stitch up TestStand steps, right? They basically drop these steps, connect, put in their parameters, they're done, and that's what they do. They don't expose anything below that. There are companies who go all the way down to like, okay, you're going to write code like C code or .NET code that calls into my HAL layer or MAL layer. And they have different levels of abstraction depending on what is the workflow a test engineer is trying to do, plus also what is the existing capability that's there, and also what is the existing knowledge base in the test engineer's world, right? Like, are they competent developers? Are they people who like to work more in signal type, like measurement type APIs? Are the people who are more comfortable with Skippy APIs? Are the people more comfortable with regular I/O calls, right? And really, I think all these things play into your decision, right? It's not here is the answer. It's more about balancing all these three aspects, right? What is their current capability? What is the workflow you're trying to do? And what do you have already available? How do you balance it out? And,
just context matters, right? How many developers do you have? What is their skill set? And also, when talking about abstraction layers, like what are the things that are actually changing most often in your system? Maybe it's actually the DUT itself, right? Maybe your test equipment's fixed, but you're constantly having to support new permutations of devices, especially if it's, more of a R&D or new design lab of sorts. So, I put you on the spot there, but I think the reality is, to my earlier point, our customers are all doing something different with different people and different contexts and different geographies. So, that's great, Anand. Thank you for the insights on that. So, I guess, a quick nod to the future and some of the, we're always working on new things and new capabilities. And I know we've shared it and I Connect and some other recent forums, some of our plans. Can you just give us a glimpse into the future and some of the things that you and the team are actively working on or exploring?
Absolutely. So one of the big focus areas is to strengthen our products, to add more refresh existing capabilities to get it where it's more modern, right? Like, so let's talk about .NET, for example. We have the capability to call into .NET framework assemblies. What the team just is currently working on, and we just released a version, is the ability to call into .NET 8 assemblies, right? And so we're migrating that forward. We're looking at better user interface control. So as I told, this is something we worked on a long time back. We want to revisit that with newer technologies, with something that we hosted on a web page that can provide similar functionality to the end customer without having to, go through all the hoops of how do I get a TestStand OI to work in a web page, things like that. The third area which I'd like to talk about is security. So one of the big things we are starting to focus on is how do we make sure the product is secure, and two, how do we add better user authentication, for example, right? Because as we start becoming more connected, this is a big challenge, and we want to make sure we solve it correctly now, as we become more service-based, more web technology-based architecture. So those are the three big areas we are looking at right now. So.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of focus too on, we're just seeing more and more very large scale, highly distributed labs and manufacturing sites. And, certainly there's tremendous value and need to manage those systems, get the data, right? So some of our investments there and the integration with our system like Toolchain are very much aligned to that. But anyway, I want to end it there, and I want to thank you for your time and your perspective on TestStand. Hopefully it's clear why and the extent of the investment value that we've put into this tool over, would you say 25 years at this point?
25 years, yes.
25 years, right? So there's a lot of value and capability built into this product. And hopefully this discussion gave you some idea of the nature of that work and the value that it offers. Anyway, thank you, Anand. And if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with future episodes of the Measurement Lab.
Thank you.